political spending, and Newsweek joins the fear-mongering. That's what we're talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests on the show are going to be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topic up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com. And my show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays, in case you missed it live. Finally, there is a debate suggestions section on my website. It is at the top of the home page. Leave me your thoughts on topics, debaters, and questions. As you know, next week's show will be the last show, and the website is likely to be converted over to a website devoted exclusively to the debates, the You Defend It debate series, and getting that on the air. So I would be happy to take your suggestions on any way you think you can assist me in doing that. It's an interesting process, and I'm going to be creating a Facebook page just dedicated to the process of getting the debates on the air. So anything you think might help, put it up on the website. Okay, I wanted to talk about, there was an important decision yesterday in the District of Columbia Federal Appeals Court, but there's also a case pending in front of the United States Supreme Court, and the way in which the Supreme Court took the case, they took it on almost an emergency basis and for no real reason. I mean, it involves political spending. In fact, it involves what's at issue is whether or not the case is whether or not a movie about Hillary Clinton should have been characterized as basically political spending close to an election. But the real issue is the ability of nonprofit corporations to spend money on political advertising, and should there be any restrictions. And it's looking a lot like those restrictions are going to fall. The Federal Appeals Court, just let me explain this to you quickly before I read the article. The federal court system is set up the same as every state system. You have a trial court where you would have a trial and a jury, things like that. Then you have an immediate or an intermediate appellate court. And then you have the Supreme Court. So the country's broken up into I think 13, I'm not sure, I think 13 or 16 appellate courts in the federal system. Like New York and Connecticut, we're all in what's called the Second Circuit Appeals Court. And then after that, the only place to go is to the Supreme Court. But traditionally, the appeals court in Washington, D.C., which is called the Federal Appeals Court for the District of Columbia, has been very influential. People look to that court. In fact, that's where many Supreme Court justices have come from. People look to that court as something, it'll give you an idea just below the Supreme Court as to where we're going in a legal sense. So let me read this article. This is from the New York Times today. The Federal Appeals Court for the District of Columbia ruled Friday that the government cannot restrict independent political spending by nonprofit groups or political committees, accelerating the judicial rollback of regulations aimed at curtailing the power of money in politics. The ruling in Emily's List versus Federal Election Commission broadens the field of activity open to groups known as 527s, after that section of the tax code, and other independent outfits like MoveOn.org on the left or Swiftboat Veterans for Truth on the right. Such organizations have stirred controversy in recent elections by funneling unlimited donations from a small number of wealthy donors into voter turnout efforts and campaign commercials. Following the direction of recent Supreme Court decisions, the appeals court held that independent groups have a First Amendment right to raise and spend freely to influence elections as long as they do not coordinate their activities with a candidate or a party. The Supreme Court has ruled that the federal government's only legitimate interest in restricting political donations is combating the appearance or reality of corruption that could arise from allowing unlimited contributions directly to a candidate or political party. The court has held that, on the other hand, a desire to level the playing field or limit the power of moneyed interest is not a permissible reason for the government to limit the amount a rich person might spend on independent efforts to elect or defeat a candidate. In this case, the appeals court held that nonprofit groups are essentially like rich individuals, so the government cannot restrict their independent spending together. Quote, donations to nonprofit groups cannot corrupt candidates and office holders, end quote. Judge Brett Kavanaugh wrote for a 3-judge panel. Quote, and to the extent a nonprofit then spends its donations on activities such as advertisements, get-out-the-vote efforts, and voter registration drives, these expenditures are not considered corrupting, even though they may generate gratitude from and influence with office holders and candidates, end quote. To regulate the political activities of nonprofit groups in order to ward off such potential gratitude and influence was overkill, Judge Kavanaugh wrote. He quoted Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. in the opinion overturning certain restrictions on corporate political spending 2 years ago in Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life. Enough is enough. The Emily's List case came about in the aftermath of the 2004 presidential election when both major party candidates complained about free spending by 527 groups. In response, the Federal Election Commission established new rules, including a $5,000 limit on the amount of money from each contributor that a group could spend trying to influence federal elections. Emily's List, which raises money for the election of Democratic women who support abortion rights, argued that the rules violated the First Amendment. The appeals court agreed. Though the groups are prohibited from coordinating with candidates, political operatives say it is usually easy enough to execute a strategy that a campaign manager has described in the news media. Okay. As you may or may not know, the restrictions on political spending really came about after Watergate. And once it came to light what was really going on with that money and the way that money was being used and the corruption associated with it, there were rules put in place to limit the amount of money that could be spent by corporations. And I think one of the issues that is glossed over in this discussion of political spending is this. Should corporations have the same rights as people? That's what the court is doing. They are giving to corporations the same rights that people have. The argument from people who do not want to see this kind of spending is not just that corporations that they're not arguing that corporations are not entitled to a voice. The problem, they say, is that their voice is louder. Now, there's no question that spending by these groups has influenced elections. And that in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the point of it. Of course they influence elections. If it didn't influence elections, they wouldn't do it. But when you think back to things like Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, which was really a small group of people that may very well have determined the outcome of an entire election just because they had more money than other people. Is it fair? Is it right? And as far as corruption is concerned, whenever you're talking about a First Amendment issue in front of the Supreme Court, it is not unconstitutional to limit speech. And that's something that I think as a public, and I hope anybody who attended the filming of the pilot for the debate series would know that, the Supreme Court upholds limitations on speech all the time. The First Amendment is not a blanket ban on laws that would limit speech. You just have certain standards you have to meet. And it gets a little complicated, but if you're going to limit speech, then the government has to have a compelling reason to do so. And it has to be, the law itself has to be narrowly tailored to achieve that goal. In this case, yesterday, when I see words like overkill, what the judge is saying is, while the government may have had an interest, may have had a legitimate interest in controlling the speech, they went way too far. And these are the types of standards you have to wrestle with in the courts on denying people speech. But certainly, we have laws on the books right now. If I were to approach a congressman and say, here's $50,000 to change your vote, that would be bribery, not a denial of my free speech rights. And the issue is, how close do these contributions come to influencing the votes or the actions of our elected representatives? I'd like to hear from you on that. Think about it over the years, the success that certain industries have had with their advertising in keeping you from understanding what they really do. The tobacco industry, how many people are dead as a result of the tobacco industry having denied for 30 years that cigarettes cause cancer? Millions. Dead. All the while, I'm saying we do not believe cigarettes cause cancer, all the while they knew it did. But they create just enough uncertainty in the public by denying it. Global warming, the petroleum industry. How many times have you heard people say there's no definitive proof on global warming? There's nothing but definitive proof on global warming. I have yet to see a peer-reviewed study, other than one prepared by the petroleum industry, that seriously calls into question global warming. But if you ask the country, there would be a divide out there based on what they've heard as to whether or not the science is really there. There is no peer-reviewed science to support the notion that global warming is not occurring. 1 year after September 11th, 73% of Americans believe that Saddam Hussein had helped plan the attacks. Now, that wasn't paid media by corporations, but that was media nonetheless by the administration at the time. It is, once you are able to reach people through cable, through television and radio, you can influence their opinions. That's why you do it. But it's easy to do. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with September 11th attacks. Almost 3/4 of America believed he did. How could that be? Because they were told by people they believed. All right, we're going to come back, and when we come back, I'm going to read to you from another article today where regarding Obama and how he has rejected race as a cause of criticism, but it's actually something he said in the article, not so much the topic of the article that I thought was worth discussing, and we're going to do just that. We will be right back. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. All right, this is another article actually from today's New York Times, and it says Obama rejects race as lead cause of criticism. This is a much briefer article. President Obama said Friday that he did not believe his race was the cause of fierce criticism aimed at his administration and the contentious national debate over health care, but rather that the cause was a sense of suspicion and distrust many Americans have in their government. Are there people out there who don't like me because of race? I'm sure there are, Mr. Obama told CNN. That's not the overriding issue here. Now, there are some who are, setting aside the issue of race, actually, I think, more passionate about the idea of whether government can do anything right, he told ABC News. And I think that that's probably the biggest driver of some of the vitriol. The President spoke to anchors from 3 broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, as well as cable networks CNN and Univision. He conceded that many people were skeptical of the health care legislation making its way through Congress. Look, I said during the campaign, there's some people who still think through a prism of race when it comes to evaluating me and my candidacy. Absolutely, Mr. Obama told NBC News. Sometimes they vote for me for that reason, sometimes they vote against me for that reason. But he said that the matter was really an argument that's gone on for the history of the Republic, and that is, what's the right role of government? The President said the contentious health care debate, which came on the heels of extraordinary government involvement in bailing out banks and automobile companies, had led to a broader discussion about the role of government in society. I think that's what's driving passions right now. I think that what's driving passions right now is that health care has become a proxy for a broader set of issues about how much government should be involved in our economy, Mr. Obama told CBS News. Even though we're having a passionate disagreement here, we can be civil to each other, and we can try to express ourselves acknowledging that we're all patriots, we're all Americans, and not assume the absolute worst in people's motives. The President used the media blitz to add to his own commentary about the news media. He said he blamed cable television and blogs, which he said focused on the most extreme element on both sides, for much of the inflamed rhetoric. The easiest way to get 15 minutes of fame, Mr. Obama said, is to be rude to someone. I think he's right about that, although it seems a little hypocritical to be going on a news blitz to complain about the news media. I think he's right. I think there's a legitimate discussion to be had about the role of government in the healthcare, well, in all industries. And once you start getting into death panels and all this other nonsense, I think you've strayed, and I don't think the country is served by that. We should be having a national debate, a national conversation on health care, and it should start with what's being proposed. This has been going on all summer. We've heard about these town hall meetings, rifles and everything else, all summer long. There aren't 10 people in 100 who could tell you what's actually being proposed. And that's because that's not exciting. I saw an article confirming that the no negotiation on drug prices for Medicare is being proposed. I think that's worth debating. It's about the most un-American thing I've ever heard of. I don't know where the voices are on this. We're talking about socialism. You know, that word keeps coming up. It's socialized medicine. The very people who are claiming that having the government involved represents socialized medicine, they are silent in the face of the very un-American idea of making it illegal for the world's largest purchaser of prescription drugs, the United States government, to negotiate the price based on volume. Last time I checked, that was a key element of capitalism, and we believe in that around here, and yet we've made it illegal to engage in that aspect of capitalism. I don't understand where the voices are on this. I understand where the politics are, but not the voices. But I think he's right. You know, the role of government itself, that is an important issue. And the government can do more every day to invade your personal life, to become aware of your actions. It's not just, we should be having a national debate. That should be the subject of a debate. What is the proper role of government? I tell this story all the time as far as when I'm talking about the role of government and how technology has made this discussion urgent. The capabilities out there for the government to track your movement, to track your purchases, to do all these things. It is incredible. This country needs a discussion on the role of government. I tell this story all the time. I had a client who had locked herself out of her car, and we were both leaving the office, and when she mentioned that she locked herself out of the car, I asked her if she needed to use if her cell phone was in the car, if she needed to use mine or the office phone to call somebody. She said, "No, that's all right. I have OnStar." I said, "What does that have to do with anything?" She used her cell phone. 2 seconds later, pop, up came the lock on her door. So from thousands of miles up in the sky, a satellite, or hundreds of miles up, a satellite opened her car door. She said, "Isn't that amazing?" I thought, that's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. I had no idea. And that was 3-4 years ago. Who knows what the capabilities are now? We should, on a much broader level, be discussing the proper role of government, not just in the context of these hysterical debates about health care, with exaggerations on both sides. And I'll get to Newsweek's, by the way, in the second half. But it's important. Americans, we have a Bill of Rights. To be an American means something. We want to keep the government at arm's length. Stay out of my life. And it would serve this country well to have a meaningful, sincere debate with facts only on what the proper role of government is. Particularly now where it looks like corporations, big corporations are now going to have an even louder voice in elections, louder than they've had in 10 years. I suspect that nearly all legislation involving political spending by corporations is going to be overturned in the next few weeks. That is an important development in a democracy. That is huge. That means the people with the most money get the most input. It's that simple. You can call it free speech all day long, but it's not equal speech. People with the most money will reach the most people. Period. We've seen what happens when people are able to do that on a smaller scale, like the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. We've seen what happens when a government does it and is able to convince 3 out of 4 Americans. And when you think about that, 3 out of 4 Americans are not Republicans. 1 out of 4 Americans, 1 out of 3 maybe, is a Republican. You have convinced Democrats and independents that Saddam Hussein was somehow responsible for September 11th. He wasn't. Yet the country believed that at a point in time. These are important issues, and we should discuss them. Okay, we'll take a quick break here at 8:30 for local news, and be back after that. We will talk about Newsweek and the last 2 cover stories in Newsweek. Amazing. You were listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio, 1290 WNBF, Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. All right, Newsweek magazine. Now, Newsweek magazine was in my house growing up every week. Until I really got a little older and started looking into these things, I thought Newsweek was, an authority on things. I thought they were objective. I thought all the things that you don't really, that you're supposed to think when you are naive. But Newsweek, I think, is a little more to the left than it is to the right. And the last two cover stories in Newsweek have just simply been amazing to me. The first one was, and I am not kidding, these are the actual cover stories in Newsweek. These were the words printed in the boldest type on the cover. The first one, this is 2 weeks ago, had a picture of a newborn, and it said, "Is your baby racist?" Now, I don't know how you'd know, but they're not saying much at that age. But it was supposed to be a serious-minded. It's supposed to get you to read a serious-minded article dealing with genetics. Last week's cover of Newsweek was designed to get you to read the article on the inside about the cost of end-of-life care. However, the cover said, "The case for killing Granny." I mean, are you kidding me? What is this? This is Newsweek, for crying out loud. "The case for killing Granny, and is your baby racist?" I mean, people like to have good thoughts about their babies and their grannies. I don't know how it is you could bring yourself to write those two headlines, those two covers. But I think it's a reflection of where we are anymore. You have to be provocative to get the readers. And I don't know whether that's a way to get... if you think about it logically, the people who like Newsweek or have read it in the past, like me, are offended that they would stoop to that level. So what is the logic there? And if you're trying to get somebody who wouldn't have read Newsweek, perhaps because they think it leans left, what are you going to accomplish other than getting them to read the article and confirm that you lean left? What is the net gain there? I say nothing. There's a net loss, because you've got people like me who've read it all their lives talking about it negatively to anybody who will listen right now. That is a sad state of affairs when Newsweek stoops to your baby being racist and killing your grandmother. I can't even believe I'm saying it. But it's there. I don't know what next week's topic is going to be in Newsweek. I'm afraid to look. But it's not like it used to be. And that's because our country is not like it used to be. It's because our country is more interested in being provoked and enticed than it is in being educated. And that's how we wound up where we are right now. We are a country arguing over things we don't understand, in general. That's what we do. At the highest volume we can achieve, we argue over things we don't get. And we don't get them because we choose not to. Anything I've ever mentioned on this show was available to you, and is available to the people who are on cable every night. Anywhere a Google search takes you 10 seconds. I don't think I've ever searched something on Google that didn't provide me with at least 10,000 options. I certainly haven't gotten, I don't go through them all, but I go through the first few pages, and I get what I want. If I want to find out what the text is of a law I type it in, and I get it. I've read laws on this show. When the original bailout was proposed, we talked about it on this show. I read the actual law. That's because it was only 12 paragraphs long, which seemed kind of brief when you're spending $700 billion. But it's amazing to me that in the age of the internet, people allow themselves to be duped, to be misled into arguing things that aren't true, into being fearful of things that don't exist, and into hating things that aren't real. We talked last week about the caller from the week prior who was upset about a Senate bill that was going to require you to list on your federal tax forms your handguns and be taxed at $50 per. We realized that that was essentially, not that the caller knew it at the time, but he'd been had. That was a gigantic hoax from the year 2000. That was not pending and is not pending before Congress right now. It went up and was shot down in 2000. No pun intended on the guns. But the notion that this is a current threat to gun owners, it's not real. Yet, we also talked about the fact that ammunition is flying off the shelves right now at a rate that prevents law enforcement and the United States government from being able to buy it, out of fear that there are new laws soon to be enacted that would curtail your right to own or purchase ammunition or guns. None of it's real. I always think, I got enough going on in my life that's real that gives me headaches. I don't need to invest any of my time or worry or anxiety into things that aren't real. I got enough going. But we don't look into things because we place too much trust in people who are supposed to tell us, the truth. They're supposed to be straight with us, and they're not. And they're not because they're paid to not be. There's no money in consensus. I say that all the time here because it's true. There's no money in consensus. I saw an article yesterday about the fact that Bill O'Reilly supports a public option for health care. I doubt he will make that the focus of his show. At some point he has either said, or maybe he was misquoted. I don't know. I didn't read the article. The headline was, Bill O'Reilly supports a public option. I don't think he'll be talking about that much. I'm surprised he said it at all if he did, because that's not in keeping with controversy. And cable thrives on controversy. We are not going to reach reasonable solutions until we make people come up with reasonable solutions and defend them. And as far as my debates are concerned, that's going to be the focus. People with solutions will come and defend them. We'll pick a problem a month, and we're going to pick people who can persuade us that they have a solution. And we're going to give America a dose of solutions, not criticism. Wouldn't it be amazing if the solutions drove the politics, rather than the politics driving the solutions? Obama's biggest mistake so far with respect to this health care was leaving it to Congress. What did he think was going to happen? He came into office telling us all about how things needed to change in Washington, and then he submitted this entire issue to Congress knowing they had not changed. And what did they do? What they always did. They've always taken issues this big and cut them up and crafted legislation that protected each one of their own special interests. And you have this thing right now pending in Congress. And now Obama's got to come riding into town to try and save it from what? From him. I would like to see Barack Obama support something that Barack Obama supports. I don't know what that is. And you can't, you can't be the last one through the door if you're going to be the leader. If he's upset about the way this has been characterized, it's because he's been AWOL while this issue is being discussed. When I said before about 73% of America believing that Saddam Hussein had something to do with September 11th, that's because the administration subtly pushed that line. And they were able to do it successfully because they have so much access to the media. Where was Barack Obama on the health care issue for the last 2 to 3 months? He should be leading the charge, not cleaning up the mess. But he hasn't. And because he didn't, that issue, that legislation, took its traditional path. It worked its way slowly through Congress, all the while giving people on both sides ample time to raise money to distort it. And that's what everybody has done. I don't know what we're going to get out of this health care legislation, but I guarantee you it will not be profound reform, which everybody acknowledges we need. Even people with health insurance understand that the people who don't are costing them money. So it's not about people with health insurance losing their plan. It's the fact that they could lose their own health insurance and just by losing a job, and that the people who don't have health insurance are costing us an astronomical amount of money. That problem's not going away. All right, we're going to take one more break here and then come back and wind up for this week. You are listening to You Defend It, right here on News Radio 1290, WNBF, Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It. Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show for the last 10 minutes or so here is 607-772-1290. We have Herb on the line from Binghamton. You there?
Yeah, Herb.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard why you were leaving. Basically, I'm an NPR listening, and I stumbled across your show a while back and said, wow, this is great.
Well, I'm leaving because I'm pursuing, it's just a matter of the time I have and the things I want to do.
Okay.
I filmed a pilot for a debate series that I want network television to pick up, and cracking into those networks and getting into those meetings and getting that project moved forward is enormously time-consuming. And
okay, this is your choice. Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
That's your choice. Fine.
I wasn't fired for my lunatic positions on on the issues. I just opted not to renew for a third year.
Uh-huh. Oh, third year. Oh, my gosh, I've missed a couple of years. That's bad.
They're available through my website, Herb.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a computer, so that'll be a little tough. I've got in the library.
Okay.
There's certainly a lot of problems out there, and population in my book is one of the largest elephants in the room.
What do you mean?
In my lifetime, it's doubled, and I guess they say last century it more than doubled.
It is,
and it's just crowding everything. You get on the highways and so many cars, and then you have people like the pro-choice people wanting to get in people's bedrooms and say, well, you and your doctor can't do that.
Well, my father used to say that he was amazed. He was over 70 when he died, and he used to say that it was amazing to him the number of cars in Binghamton. he was stuck on that. He would say, I just cannot get over the number of cars in Binghamton compared to when I was younger.
Yep. Yeah.
Everybody's got 2 or 3.
And so many of our problems are related to the people, people being crowded out of Palestine or whatever, Just,
yeah, there's only so much room.
Only so much earth, yeah.
Well, thanks for calling in, Herb.
You bet.
Take care. Bye. I've often wondered that. I mean, there is only so much room, so much food, so much everything. And with the and I was reading a book a few months ago that just on population alone, just on birth rates, certain religions are going to have they're going to dwarf other religions or people who believe in other religions in 10, 12 years. And it also shapes politics in the United States. When I believe I read that the majority of Americans will be what we have traditionally referred to as minorities in a short period of time. And that's not a bad thing. That's democracy. Everybody will have to participate and have their voice heard and hopefully get their way, whatever that is. Doesn't that make it all the more important that we actually have facts going in? I say yes. But right now, I have heard nothing. This is the other point I wanted to make today. I have heard nothing in the last 3 months about any other major issue other than health care. Don't we have other issues? I mean, what is the timeline for this? What is the schedule? If we do it in a month, everybody says, you went too fast on an issue of this magnitude. But the longer it goes, the more distorted it gets, and the less likely you are to reach consensus. That, in and of itself, is a major failure in our democracy. Logically, normally, the longer you discuss something, the more likely it would be to reach consensus. Juries stay out 3, 4, 5 days, and then 12 strangers agree. 12. In America, we have a Congress that the more they talk, the less they agree. And the more time you give them, the more time they have to distort, to have their pet interests raise money and distort. We spend as much time dispelling rumors as we do talking about the substance of what we all agree are critical issues. And it's shameful that there's any tolerance whatsoever for that. But there is. That's America right now. America wants to be spoon-fed controversy. But I don't think there's any future in that. I mean, what is the future in not resolving issues? How do we define victory right now? Defeating health care reform? What does that do? Is there a plan to put it back on the schedule a month later? Not that I'm aware of. When it ends, and we move on to something else without having resolved the issue. We need people to come up with solutions, people to show up with solutions, and defend them. Not criticize the other side. Show up with their own solutions. And that's exactly what I'm proposing to do. We'll see. I hope I should be able to keep people updated on a weekly basis at worst after next week, after my last show, as to the project on the debates, and I should be able to devote more time to them as well. All right, we got time here for one more call. Maria, you there?
Yes. Hi, Mr. Kilmer. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I just what I want to comment on is the total quagmire we're in. Medicine is being practiced a great deal by the special interest groups, pharmaceuticals. Seems like everybody but the doctor is practicing medicine, and he spends or she spends a great deal of his time trying to get proper treatments for patients that they have to clear with insurance companies first. We're in a quagmire in the medical world here. The special interest groups seem to run a great many different things in the country, and it seems like they're kind of our second-rate representatives for the interest of whoever forks over the most money.
I think that's true.
I don't know. I know time has almost run out. We have been in several quagmires in these more recent wars, including the one that we're in that seemed to be impossible to see number 32, the end, to resolve. And I think you're quite correct, sir. Everything is chewed to death, whatever it is or how important it is, until it's like a dead, limp rag. And it goes nowhere.
And that's called victory.
I don't know how anyone. There was a fellow by the name of Ron Paul. I think he would have taken a good shot at maybe trying to untie some of the knots. The thing that frightens me is this country is a young country, but in its youth it has been through a great many dangers and trepidations, and we seem to have come out of them all right. But we're not the first culture that while we're getting engaged in other enterprises, especially called these terribly useless, destructive wars, that would go down from the enemy within. And I think we are the last great culture on this earth. I think when this one goes, where do you go from there? Well, the points are globalism and New World Order.
I gotta end the call, but because I got less than a minute left. But I think you're right about a good part of that.
Well, thank you very much, as I said to you last week, for this program. It has been a real class act, and it has been done fairly and in the best of taste.
Thank you.
You have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. There's a lot to be said for all this talk about what the government would do with health care. What's your insurance company doing with it? I don't hear that discussion. But as far as, and I got about 20 seconds to go here, the enemy within, I know a lot of people talk about that in terms of liberals or conservatives. I talk about that in terms of the manner in which we discuss things. That's the enemy within, because it prevents us from solving our own problems. Thank you for listening to You Defend It. We will be back next week for the last time. I'm Rob Kilmer. I will see you next week.